How's everybody doing today? I certainly hope you're doing well. Long time no see. It's time for another edition of Story Time, but I like to tell people whether or not this story is true or not, but wow, this story is a little bit different because it really is up to you to know whether or not the story is true. Because this is one of those kind of stories where it's possible that it's ongoing right now. Not only is it possible, maybe it's actually going on right now. Who's to say? Who's to really know? Let you decide on whether or not this story has any validity to it. So let's go ahead and start. The name of this story is called Alien Frequency. You see, there was this doctor, and he'd been a doctor for over 22 years, and his name was Dr. Moffet. And Dr. Moffet was a very educated individual. Not only was he a medical doctor, but before he decided that he was going to become a medical doctor, he had several degrees in electronics. So he knew about everything there is to know about radio frequencies and different frequencies and television and all kinds of things, you know. But you know, his passion was being a doctor. So he went through the ranks of surgery this and surgery that, and that got a little bit boring. But the good thing about Dr. Moffet is if one of these instruments broke that needed to have electricity applied to the instrument, he could fix it. He didn't have to send it out to shop somewhere because Dr. Moffet was a genius when it came to electronics. He knew it all. And he could fix anything. It was no big deal. So you see, that saved his certain practice a lot of time and money and effort and everything. He just does it himself, right? He's certainly qualified for it. So after about 15 years being a surgeon, and he wanted to delve into something a little bit, I don't know, a little bit different. So he decided that he was going to work for the morgue. And he was going to perform autopsies. And before you knew it, he was the top dog. Sure, he had people working under him. But you know, when it came to those specialty cases, he would perform autopsies, make sure all the charting and the photographs and the video and everything, the dictation of the autopsy, was performed in a very professional manner. And you see, all of his colleagues were very impressed with the way that he conducted his autopsies, because not only were they thorough, but they were extremely well documented and professional. Wow. So, here was a Friday night about 8 o'clock, and he gets a call from the county sheriff. See, him and the sheriff have been pals for so long, because let me tell you something. When you're doing autopsies and such, you come across all these individuals that are no longer with us because of this reason or that reason or who knows what. So you get some sort of relationship going with the police and the sheriff and all that sort of stuff, because you're in constant contact with these people every day. Every day! They get the call, you pick them up. And then you perform the autopsy, make all the charting, contact family and all that stuff. But you see, Dr. Moffet got a call from the sheriff. And you see, this wasn't every call. This wasn't just any call. This was a very unusual call. Oh, yeah. You see, the sheriff went on to tell Dr. Moffet that the sheriff office had gotten a call that an individual was on side of the road there in a car, and he didn't look like he was with us anymore. So the sheriff's office dispatched 2 officers to go out to the scene. Well, when those officers went out to the scene, they noticed that the person in the driver's side was actually not with us anymore because they took the basic vitals and such. But because of the uniqueness of the situation, the sheriff was called himself to come look at the scene. It wasn't really a crime scene. They couldn't determine if there was really a crime committed, but they knew that the person in the driving seat was no longer with us. So the sheriff went out there and he noticed that the individual in the driver's seat, something was strange there. Because this individual really didn't look human, but he didn't look alien, but something was just not right. So they went to pull this individual out of the car. This is what the sheriff is telling Dr. Moffet. They went to pull the individual out of the car, and the individual sitting in the car probably looked like, they weighed maybe 150 pounds, maybe 160. But when they went to pull this individual out of the vehicle, this individual weighed almost 500 pounds. How's that possible? Well, it's not possible. Something's wrong. They actually needed help getting this individual out of the car. Once they got this individual out of the car, again, it took 4 or 5 people just to lift the individual so that way they could be placed on the gurney to be taken to the morgue. It was absolutely amazing. So Dr. Moffet said to the sheriff, "So I don't understand, why are you calling me? I mean, is that really that strange that this person actually weighed more than what they appear to weigh? I mean, that's, I don't understand." He said, "Oh, no, that's not all, Dr. Moffet. That's not all at all. We were doing a perimeter check around the vehicle just to see if there was any sort of indicators that would indicate foul play. Upon doing so, about 55 feet away, there was yet another individual that looked the same as far as their facial features. And here we go again. They looked like maybe they were 5'6", 5'7", but they weighed about 500 pounds. We couldn't understand it. Now we got 2 of them. We got John Doe number 1 and John Doe number 2. Now we need to bring them to you, and we need an autopsy, obviously, to find out the cause of death and all this stuff." Dr. Moffet is like, "Okay, well, I'll come down personally, and I'll check out the situation." So, as Dr. Moffet was driving into his place of employment, he's trying to think to himself if he had ever come across this before, and he's kind of shaking his head. "No, I never have. I can't ever remember working on a John Doe number 1 or John Doe number 2 being what appeared to be 5'6", 5'7", and weighing 500 pounds. I got to see this for myself." So as Dr. Moffet walked in and takes a sheet and pulls it down, he's thinking, "Now wait a minute. This individual appears to me as being thin. I got the sheriff calling me at 8 o'clock at night saying the individual weighs about 400 or 500 pounds. No, I don't believe it. This person can't weigh that much. I mean, look at him." That's what he's saying to himself, right? Well, he calls in one of his assistants there, and they're just going to lift up this body and place him down there so he can do his autopsy. No, he's not, because that individual weighs about 500 pounds, which is true. So whatever the sheriff told him, he was absolutely right. Even though this individual appears to be 5'6", 5'7", looks thin, well, that doesn't mean anything. Because this is like an iron body. It's not making sense. But look at the appearance of this individual. It doesn't quite look human, but it doesn't quite look alien. It kind of looks in between. So with several different assistants, they finally get this John Doe number 1 up on this area where he performs the autopsies. He's got the video cameras going. He's got dictation going. He's got his little notes off to the side. He cracks open the body and he starts pulling organs. He starts looking around and perusing around to see if this body is matching up to the human body. Or is it not matching up? Or is there something going on? And what is making this individual who looks like they're 5'6", 5'7", and would weigh maybe 150, 160, actually weigh 500 pounds? Something is wrong. And how is it possible? You see, Dr. Moffet, he found out real quickly how that's possible. He sure did. Because the area where the liver would be, it kind of appeared to be the liver in ideally the same position as a human body. It was a little bit off of whack, but hey, that could be of different reasons. But as soon as he removed that, he noticed that the liver itself was encased in 24 karat gold. About that thick, all the way around. He got out one of his instruments there to break the barrier of the gold to see if there was liver behind or up underneath the gold. The gold shielding, and there was. The gold was protecting the liver itself. The gold was a protective barrier. So you see, Dr. Moffet wanted to see, well, hold on a second. Is that going to be the same way with the kidney? Is that going to be the same way with all the other organs? And indeed it was. Mm-hmm. Yep. Every single organ had a 24 karat gold shielding about this thick all the way around the organ. Every single one. Dr. Moffet is fascinated. He's never seen anything like this in all his life, ever. Never. So Dr. Moffet there, as he's making his report, he's filling out his notes, he's making a little bit of dictation, he's got the video cameras rolling. And the light above, he grabbed one of the organs and he was holding it up to the light to examine it a little bit more closely. Because he couldn't quite see with that light blasting all the shadows in this. And as he started to hold it up, he noticed that the video camera started flickering. Because the camera is kind of above the light there. So he took the organ itself and he moved it over to where the camera would be. And man, I tell you what, damn near turned the thing off. It was some sort of interference. Well, maybe it's the gold encasement around the organ that's interfering with the camera. So you see Dr. Moffet there. Again, he's a genius when it comes to electronics. He decided he's going to go turn on a radio. That's what he did. He went over there and went into the next office, turned on a regular radio, a little music. He took the organ, he's holding it very gently, and he brings it over to the radio, and as soon as he gets within about 5 feet, the radio started going. The frequency of the radio was being interrupted by the organ. How is it possible? Well, I tell you how it's possible. Because the human body, every part of the human body, as far as your organs go, emit a frequency. That is a fact, Jack. Yeah, sure does. And Dr. Moffet, he knew this. But he wanted to test the frequency of this whatever it was, entity, to find out if the organ of this entity, what was the frequency and what was the measurement of the frequency that it was emitting. Because let me tell you something. As far as the human body goes, if you have a very healthy human that is eating right and exercises, the frequency that is being emitted by the organs is going to be much higher than someone who is sick. Or the frequency that is being emitted by an individual that is dying is going to be much lower than to someone who is healthy. And he knew this. So he decided to test the frequency of this organ that came from John Doe number 1 to see the ratio in accordance or comparison with the human body. So that's what he did. And he found, through his preliminary testing, that the frequency of the organ in comparison with the human, same exact organ, was about 10 times higher. And this individual was deceased. Wow. Wow. Then he came to the area of the stomach, and he noticed that there was something that looked like a hockey puck with a bunch of little tubes coming out of it. The strangest thing he ever seen in all his life. He pulled this out and he saw these little tubes, and they're like translucent. You couldn't quite see through them, but they weren't really solid either. They were kind of in between, and he took his snips and snipped one of them, and this gas was emitting out. He'd snip it out. He's recording the whole thing on video. Oh, yeah. So he decided he's going to take this thing that looked like a hockey puck that was in the stomach area. He's going to set that aside. He's going to send that off to get a biopsy of this, to find out what that is made of, what is there. He sets that totally aside from all his notes and documentation of the autopsies he is performing on John Doe number 1. He also notices that this particular individual doesn't have any large or small intestines. What is going on with that? How is that possible? So there's no mode of waste when it comes to this individual. Again, how is that possible? Because this person, this John Doe number 1, is not a human. Oh, it has the appearance of a human, but internally, this is no human at all. Every single organ has an encasement of 24 karat gold that's about this thick, weighing this individual down. But then he got to thinking, you know something? I got John Doe number 2 as well. Sure do. Because the sheriff found John Doe number 2 within 55 to 60 feet away from John Doe number 1 that was initially called in, that was slumped over in the driver's seat at the scene. So Dr. Moffet, he wrapped up that autopsy. This is going to be the most profound report that he's ever done in all his life. And the good thing is he's got it all on video. Except the part where he did with the testing of the frequency that was being emitted by the organs, where the radio was on in the office, and he's trying to find out if there's any interference between the frequency of the radio and the organ itself, which there was. So then he decides to do an autopsy on John Doe number 2. And I tell you what, he's kind of tired too, because he's been working at this for quite a few hours. But you know what? He is so intrigued about what he is seeing. He is potentially making history. Because after all, it's not every day that you go to perform an autopsy and you find organs that are encased in 24 karat gold. He was fascinated, boy. Oh, he's fascinated, man. He is seeing something for probably the very first time. Or hell, who knows? Maybe the government knows. But he is fascinated. And seeing that Dr. Moffet had the understanding of all electronics and frequencies. Wow, the possibilities of all of this is potentially endless. So what's he going to do? he sets up for autopsy number 2, for John Doe number 2. Once again, he enters and he goes to pull out these organs. Same thing. The organs are in John Doe number 2 are encased in 24 karat gold. Every single one of them. He's fascinated. He comes across the stomach area, which would be the stomach area of the human body. But on this thing, this entity, this alien maybe, he notices that there's no small or large intestines. Again, there's this thing that looks like a hockey puck with a bunch of translucent tubes coming off of it. The same exact thing that he found in John Doe number 1. So again, he takes one of his tools there to break the barrier of the 24 karat gold to see if there's an organ behind it, just like he did with John Doe number 1, and indeed there is. He too takes up the kidney there and he's holding it up to the light so he can really see and examine all the way around. And there goes that video camera. He races off into the office, turns on the radio, brings the organ over there. Once again, he's within 5 feet, and the radio... There's interference. Then he gets to thinking, now hold on a second here. Seeing that the human body and all the organs of the human body emit a frequency, and depending on the health of the individual, or even if the individual is alive, that they are emitting some sort of frequency. But this thing, this entity, this alien, if you want to call it that, their organs are emitting 10 times the frequency of a human. And they're deceased. So, what would it be if they were alive? Very, very strange. So he grabs the heart of John Doe number 2. And the heart is encased in gold, except being this thick, it's like a ½ inch, just like it was on John Doe number 1. And he gets to thinking, now hold on a second here. I wonder what would happen if I took the heart from John Doe number 2, set it down on the table, then went back to John Doe number 1 and got that heart and set it next to John Doe number 2. Would anything happen? He wanted to go see. That's what he did. He took the heart of John Doe number 2 and he placed it on the table. He went back, got the heart of John Doe number 1 and placed both hearts next to each other. Not touching, but just next to each other. And the strangest thing happened. Both hearts started beating. Wait a minute. How are these hearts beating? How is that possible? There's no resistance, there's nothing for it to beat against. How is it the heart are beating? And Dr. Moffet, he'd think he had it figured out. And how he thought he had it figured out was, hold on a second now. John Doe number 1 was in the driver's side of this vehicle, showed no signs of trauma on the body, but was clearly no longer with us. And between 55 and 60 feet away, there was John Doe number 2, also showing no signs of trauma. So is it possible that the reason why both of these aliens are no longer with us is because they were separated and they need the frequency of each other to stay alive? That's exactly what it is. Oh yeah, that's exactly what happened. And how did Dr. Moffet know that that's what happened? Because as those hearts were beating, he started separating the hearts further and further apart. And as he did that, the beating of those hearts became slower and slower. So he's got it figured out. The reason why John Doe number 1 is no longer with us and John Doe number 2 is no longer with us is because both of those entities need to be in close proximity in order to stay alive. That's the whole ball of wax, buddy. They have to be in exact close proximity because the frequency of John Doe number 2 is enhancing and keeping John Doe number 1 alive and vice versa. Oh yeah. He's fascinated because he knows that's exactly what's going on. But who does he tell? Who's going to believe such nonsense unless they see it for themselves? Of course he has it on video. Of course he has his notes. But this is like craziness. He is so damn excited. I tell you what, Dr. Moffet is so excited about his discovery. He's so excited that he was able to perform an autopsy on John Doe number 1 and 2 with the same exact results. And those organs are emitting a frequency that is 10 times higher than any human could be at the point of it being deceased. I tell you what, he's got breakthrough information right here. Yep. He decides that he's going to have to call himself a government agency, Department of Health. He's going to have to contact CDC, all that stuff. That's exactly what he did, too. He took a snippet of the 2 beating hearts that were encased in gold, of course, even though he took one of his instruments and he cut through the barrier of the gold to get, of course, to the tissue. Yeah, these hearts are beating when they're close by, and as he separates them, once they get a certain separation, both of them stop. One needs the other to stay alive. This is fascinating. Yeah. So he sends a snippet of that video to the Department of Health, which is a government agency, and also to the CDC. He wraps it up for the night. He's got everything charted, everything videotaped. Everything is the way it should be. Comes in the next day and he's going over the previous night's reports, and next thing you know, the doors are busted down. You got these guys, and only about this much of their face is showing. It says federal agent on it. They got, M16s in their hands, pointing it in his face and say, Dr. Moffet, you're going to sit your ass over here. You're going to shut your mouth. And we are taking John Doe number 1 and 2 out of here, buddy, and you're not going to do a damn thing about it. If you open your mouth about it, guess what? You ain't going to be a doctor no more. You're going to disappear. You're going to have an accident, pal. You get that? Do we make ourselves clear? Yep. Make yourself real clear. He didn't say a word. Then this guy waltzes in. He's got a hat on. He's wearing glasses. He doesn't have a weapon in his hand. And he's not wearing some sort of mask where you only see that much of his face. But he comes waltzing in. He says, you know something, Dr. Moffet? We really appreciate your call. We really appreciate your call. We appreciated the little snippet that you sent us of the video there of the 2 cards. But you know something, between you and me, Dr. Moffet, I just want to tell you something. And the reason why I'm going to tell you this there, Dr. Moffet, is because I know that if you tell anybody what I'm telling you, nobody's going to believe you. And they're going to think you're nuts. But seeing how you've already seen something that you weren't supposed to see, and you saw it by mere chance, I'm going to share with you what's really going on. And again, if you share it with anyone, and I don't care if you do, they'll think you're crazy and they'll have you incarcerated. They will have you placed into a mental hospital because it is so preposterous. Dr. Moffet looked at him, just kind of stared at him, didn't say anything. He didn't know if he had a right to really say anything. Didn't want to get shot in the face, you know. This man with the sunglasses says to him, I'll tell you what there, Dr. Moffet. Seeing that John Doe and John Doe 1 and 2 there, and you've already done the autopsy, so you know what's going on internally. You've already seen it with your eyes. We know that you've seen it with your eyes. You have it on video. You have all your notes. You have your dictation. Well, let me just tell you something. We've seen this several times before, and actually, these entities, if you want to call them that, I'm going to tell you what's going on. There has to be 2 of them, at least 2, in order to survive. Because, as you're well aware of, and as your theory, as you spoke in your dictation, that's indeed a fact. There must be 2 for them to survive. Because one of the entities is actually feeding the life of the other through the frequency. And you see, here's the thing there. Have you ever heard of harvesting? I'm sure you have there, Dr. Moffet. They do it all the time in Vietnam and China especially, where people harvest organs. That is their main source of income. That's their livelihood. You see, the United States government is trying to manipulate things, if you will. And through the measure of, let's say, vaccinations, we're trying to enhance that sort of protective coating and covering of 24 karat gold around all the organs of the human body. So there's a lot of, let's say, manipulation going on, if you will, in that sense of things. And these entities are helping us along with that progression, if you will, of the human body. And you just happen to stumble upon it. Does that make sense? So, in 20 or 30 years, maybe all of the human race will have a slight covering of 24 karat gold around all of their organs, and they too will emit a frequency that will enhance the life of another. I mean, it's all about life, right there, Dr. Moffet? Does that make sense? And again, we don't care if you tell anyone because no one will believe you. That's why we're taking John Doe number 1 and John Doe number 2 with us. And we're taking all your notes, your dictation, your video, everything. Everything is gone. Yep. So anyway, I'll leave you with that there, Dr. Moffet. And again, tell anybody you want, because they'll just laugh at you. They'll have you committed. Thank you very much for your time. Gotta go. And you see all of the federal agents with the M16s, and they take the bodies and pew, they're out of there. About 3 hours later, he gets a call from the Department of Health. Wait a minute. Hold on a second. Dr. Moffet is like, wait a minute. You guys were just here. He goes, what do you mean we were just here? What are you talking about? We sent no federal agents to your facility. We got your videotape there of the 2 hearts and whatever you're trying to explain, and it is fascinating. We'd like to see what you got going on. He goes, well, wait a minute, I can't. Federal agents just busted down my doors not even a few hours ago, and they took both bodies. The Department of Health is not very amused. They're very pissed off. They're like, oh, really? Sure they did. So you see, they reviewed the security video cameras, and he was telling the truth. They really did do that. But guess what? It wasn't federal agents. Nope. So, who was it? I'll let you decide. I'm Montagraph, and if you can't speak freely, you're simply not free. Have a good one.